Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery preparing to check in on my two newest worm bins. Two worm bins that were launched exactly 8 days ago. And at the same time, we're also going to check in on what can probably still be considered as my oldest system. Because up until the point where I feel like I've got only a batch of harvested castings, minus any worms, I'm still going to treat that as sort of an active system that still needs work before it can be wrapped up. So we're going to feed the brand new systems that were launched 8 days ago, but the castings that they left behind are assumed to still house a bunch of little baby wormies, or just straggler wormies, not necessarily babies. Because when we harvested these castings, we did so by screening the material. Many worms fell through the screen, so we established a little bait box resting here on the surface of the harvested castings, try to lure all the worms out so that at some point we could do a reunion of the stragglers with the worms that were used to launch the two new bins. So we'll start here. I'm going to get the system up on the bench and we're going to get to work. So let's get started. So now what we used as bait down here in the bait box was watermelon rinds, and then we put some well dampened bedding material on top of it. And the idea was to keep that other plastic lid on top, as well as that piece of newspaper that was over it, to keep things nice and dark and comfortable so that worms might want to come and hang out in here and hopefully stay if they do. And on the flip side, in addition to trying to create a tempting place for the worms to want to come out to here in the bait box, the material in the system at large, as you can see, has just been left uncovered, hopefully allowing some of its moisture content to evaporate away, and by doing so we'll end up with some material that's going to become a little bit inhospitable for worms to remain in. Sometimes I would go ahead and try to capture some of these little wormies out here on the surface when they came so close to making it into the bait box that I figured why not help them out. And the moisture level right beneath the bait box is going to be pretty nice. So to try to further make the material down here in the bin inhospitable and continue to try to make the bait box the only place here in this tub, a place where the worms would want to remain, is to combine all that damp stuff with some of this dry stuff that's out here on the surface. So why don't we bring in some of the dry, and then I can combine it with the stuff that's been under the bait box for the past 8 days, protected from drying, and help further dry the material in this container. And it does appear to me like we've probably done a really good job here collecting up the worms that were still left in this castings material. A lot of times if you go to the very bottom of a container that's becoming dry, that's the other place where you'll start encountering worms too. I guess that kind of makes sense. They're just following their instincts to try to get away from what's dry on the surface and try to make their way to material that's more comfortable to be in down low. So sometimes I do wonder if it's a little counterproductive by creating an environment that's going to cause the worms to want to dive to seek a comfortable place to be. But whatever, it does seem to me like this is working, because this stuff did have a good many worms in it, so I would assume if we were to look around within this bait box, we would find a good many worms hanging out in it. A good many worms that appear to be pretty hungry too, I assume, because I don't see anything that resembles watermelon rind. So they've done a really good job clearing out the food that was placed in this bait box for them. But my plan was to simply let this process continue. Now that we've stirred up the contents of the bin with the harvested castings in it, further making anything in there that was still somewhat damp and hospitable, making it much drier by blending in the dry stuff that was out on the surface with it. And I think that in itself is just going to trip off a response in any worms remaining in the harvested castings. A response that's going to send them searching for more comfortable material to be in. And here and there I'm definitely seeing some extremely tiny worms. They seem to just, I don't know, it's almost like static or something. They surface tension, I guess, moisture, whatever, they definitely seem to adhere to your glove. So it does seem to me like this evacuation of the finished castings is coming along very, very good. I mean, I know there's still going to be worms here and there within it, and at this point I'm going to resist the urge to keep picking them out one by one. I'm going to simply give this whole thing one last stir, and then I've got this food that I bought down with which we're going to feed the two new systems. Everything here was frozen, and as you can see, as they start to thaw, they become mushy. So these banana peels were sitting upright in that container, but they've since had a chance to start thawing and softening up. So I wanted to make sure that I've got sufficient bedding and food in that bait box to suit the needs of any worms that have moved into it at this point. As you can see, a good many have. And also suit the needs of any additional worms that still have yet to move into it. And you know, I'm going to be away for probably a good week and a half or so, leaving tomorrow. And on my long list of systems to check in on before being able to go away with peace of mind, I am at the end of the list now. So checking in on these systems here was the grand finale, and once this is done I could hang up my worm farming apron and start packing for the trip. So it was a week ago that I started into actively trying to prepare all my systems for my departure, and this was the last on the list. So before we go, we're gonna just selectively choose some yummy fruit and veggie matter out of this assortment that I bought down for the two bins where the majority of the worms, I believe, were captured in the screening and hauling out process to launch those two new systems. And I've also got my prepared bedding that we're going to drop a little bit of it in here so that the worms have plenty of material to be in and to be comfortable in. And you know, I don't remember if we included any grit when we first launched this bait box, so why don't we give them a little bit of that as well. My prepared bedding here too, I don't know, I think there is still a pretty good bit of bedding down in here in this system, so I don't know if we have to go too overboard, but I figured at least a handful of this stuff just to top it all off here, to give them some extra stuff to nibble on should the kitchen scraps be depleted. They can always turn to the paper and cardboard mix as a backup food source. So that looks pretty good to me. Let's dampen it, because even though I do dampen my prepared bedding before I put it up on the shelf, I just didn't really make this particular batch terribly moist, so I figured we can supplement its existing moisture content slightly by coming in here with my spray bottle. So now I have this feeling that what we've created is going to be a really nice, comfortable place for the worms to remain in, the ones that have already gathered in here. And hopefully, perhaps by the next time we come in here, we will have succeeded in rounding up the last of the stragglers. And I guess at this point we would also have to assume that any cocoons that were left behind by the hauled out worms are now also having an opportunity to hatch. So we're also rounding up babies here. But I do have a feeling by the next time we come back, which, like I said, is probably going to be something in the neighborhood of 2 weeks from now, this stuff is all going to be extremely dry. The worms will have probably all evacuated. I mean, that is the goal, so I'd like to think that we're going to possibly reach the goal by the next time we come back in here. But now it's time to head over to the 2 new systems and get them fed. So let's do that next. So now if you were with me during the last check-in, you may have noticed these little tiny stickers showing that this is tub number 9 and this is tub number 10. At some point after I've commissioned the systems and christened them with their labels, it's at that point they sort of take over their new identity of bin number 1 of African nightcrawlers, bin number 2 of African nightcrawlers, and at that point I do have a relationship between just my inventoried bin number in my tracking spreadsheet and the sort of temporary name that that container assumes while it's doing its current job of housing these African nightcrawlers. You might have seen a little bit of scribble on the label alongside where my abbreviation is for African nightcrawler, where it says ANC. You might have also noticed the letters CWL, which stands for Crazy Worm Lady, which is the place where I received these particular African nightcrawlers. I've also got another batch of African nightcrawlers that I received from Gaetano over at Northeast Worms, or whatever he's calling the company now. It seems like he's in the process of rebranding his company, so I received a newsletter from him recently. But either way, I've got worms from various sources. And like I mentioned earlier, when we moved these little guys out of the yellow buckets that they'd been living in up until 8 days ago, we did so by screening. And part of what happened was we ended up separating a good bit of this chunky, clumped together material. It came along for the ride as part of screening the nice castings. So all the nice castings that we just saw in that tub over there where the stragglers live was all the nice fine stuff that could slip through a screen, and this was all the rest. So this stuff just kind of came along with the worms. This was what was in bucket 1. This was when it was in bucket number 2. You could tell right away. I mean, I can from here. Hopefully you can as well. The material in bucket number 1 was considerably more clumped together in these little boulders. So whatever, I mean, let's proceed with giving them their fair share of food today. I did pre-build these systems with food when they were launched off 8 days ago. The worms would have had a chance to just kind of cruise through the material and look for some of the food that I left for them, which was really just a bunch of coffee. A bunch of coffee that I sprinkled around all over the place, so there's no one concentrated location where the feeding was positioned. It was just sprinkled all over the place for the most part. And I guess one of my observations while handling the wormies last time was how scrawny many of them had become. So I did make an attempt to make this environment fairly damp for them so that they can start to regain some of their body mass. I believe that one of the first things to go when the worms start experiencing perhaps the early stages of dehydration is just the loss of their body mass due to moisture being lost. So I'm even thinking that perhaps at the end I can get my high pressure squirt bottle out here, not the one that I used earlier to hand pump and spray the bait box, but the one that's already pumped up with a considerable amount of pressure and holds a far greater quantity of water. I can just come in here and just, you know. Do I need to repeat that? It's kind of a complex expression there. But I think you get the idea, you know. With that thing I can really dispense a fairly large quantity of water in a fairly short period of time. So I am sort of taking the time here to blend in all this clumpy material into the material that makes up the system, all this shredded paper, cardboard, and leaves and everything. I really do want to see this stuff start to break apart and blend in and not be clumpy like this anymore. We won't have so much of it over in bin number 2, but here in bin number 1 it did seem to me like it wouldn't hurt to blend this stuff in, and hopefully over time from us handling it, this stuff will start to break apart and blend in and no longer be in that state. So let's continue on here. We're gonna follow suit here, which is really just to blend in all the material that accompanied the worms that's out here on the surface down into the rest of the bedding that makes up these bins. I'm definitely seeing worms all over the place because there is no one place where food would have been put. Today the food's going down the middle, which is the way I usually feed in most of my systems. So perhaps the next time we check in on these little guys, we'll find a little bit more of a concentration in the location where we fed versus what we're seeing here, which is worms kind of all over the place. All right. I think we're almost at the point where we could come in with their lovely assortment of frozen fruits and veggies and give them their feeding. New systems I typically consider as pretty well stocked with more than enough bedding. But regardless, since it is best practice to always include bedding with your feedings, unless for whatever reason you're strategically, tactically, I don't know where where those words fit in properly in this case. Perhaps by design you omit or minimize bedding, but in these instances it's good to be generous, I believe. So I'm attempting, over the past few check-ins you might have noticed a pattern developing here in my wormery, which is me attempting to eliminate my fairly large stockpile of used napkins. So I'm probably going to continue with it until I start to feel like I'm making progress in doing that. That's sort of a running joke because I keep bumping into a napkin here and there which has been used to fix lipstick applications. And at this point I know there's 2 different people that my mom's identified as potentially the person who's been doing it, or maybe it's both persons that she suspected are the fashionistas trying to make themselves beautiful. So now we can come in with today's lovely assortment of, starting off with a large banana peel for each system, and then all the other stuff going in is just this and that. A lot of it is potato peel and cucumber peel, just from an initial glance, but there's plenty of other stuff in here too. And I have a feeling that the worms are going to appreciate this lovely assortment of frozen fruits and veggies. By giving them stuff that's been frozen ahead of time, I have a feeling that it's going to cause this stuff to become really soft and mushy and easy to eat in a very short period of time. So hopefully they enjoy the first meal being applied since they were positioned in here. Like I said, these bins were pre-fed, so according to my record keeping, these are being considered as feedings number 2 in both systems. But this was actually our first check-in since the launch of the systems, and if you ask me, I think things look pretty good in here. The worms look pretty content. They seem pretty healthy and lively. The moisture content of the systems seems pretty good too. But I think just to kind of give them a little treat, I'm going to follow through with what I mentioned earlier, which is to bring in my squirt bottle and start spraying. So luckily all I've got to do is reach under the bench here and grab the squirt bottle, and I'm fairly certain I put it away with a high degree of pressure in it already, so that all I got to do is pull the trigger and it's ready to go. As far as where to position the moisture, I don't think it matters so much, you know, because as you might have noticed when we were starting out, we removed some bubble wrap coverings, which is going to more or less contain the system's moisture down underneath the plastic and allow it to circulate. So moisture will attempt to leave the system, it'll get caught, condense back down. So I think we're going to lose a minimal amount of moisture in these systems between now and the check-in. And all this moisture, I have a feeling the worms are, oops, going to appreciate. And even my bench gets a little spray of it too. Oh well, no big deal. So I think we're done here. All we got to do is return the coverings. Nice little piece of newspaper on top here, which as it gets damp, I'm assuming the worms are going to also start taking advantage of as a potential food source. Unless, of course, they feel more comfortable being down low in the bed because of the light that shines through the bubble wrap, with this being pretty much a transparent, or if not transparent, then definitely translucent material. This is a fairly light, bright place to be during the day, but at night, who knows? This could be a place where all the wormies are partying big time. So that's it for our check-in now with the 8-day-old African nightcrawler system's doing really nice in here. And next time we come back in here, we could be dealing with a family reunion, emptying the bait box. So I guess we'll just have to wait and see if that's in the cards for us. So that's it for the video, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.